The witch never missed any church program until the truth came out. 0130 Hook, opening scene. For 7 years, she sat on the third row, every Sunday, every Bible study, every prayer meeting, never late, never absent, always smiling. The congregation loved her. The pastor's wife called her a blessing. Children ran to hug her after service. She was the kind of woman who brought homemade pie to potlucks and stayed late to help clean up. She was perfect, too perfect, because one night, during a special revival service, something happened that no one saw coming. The lights went out, a child screamed, and when they came back on, she was standing at the altar, whispering words no one recognized. That's when they realized the woman they'd trusted for 7 years wasn't who she claimed to be. And the truth? It was more terrifying than anything they could have imagined. If you think you know the people sitting next to you in church, think again. This is the story of how an entire congregation discovered they'd been praying alongside someone who had been watching them all along. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 133T's Key Questions. This happened in a small town in the American Midwest, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where church isn't just a Sunday ritual, but the heartbeat of the community. Population 3,000. One main street. 3 churches. And in one of those churches, a woman showed up one Sunday morning in 2016, introduced herself as Margaret, and never missed a service again. For 7 years, she became part of the fabric of that church. She knew everyone's name, everyone's struggles, everyone's secrets. But here's what no one asked. Why was she really there? What was she hiding all those years? And what happened on the night everything fell apart? These are the questions that kept investigators up at night. Questions that divided the town. Questions that still don't have clear answers. Who was Margaret really? Why did she choose this specific church? What was she after? And most disturbing of all, what did she write in that diary they found hidden under her floorboards? 310. Backstory. Character setup. Margaret appeared to be in her late 50s, maybe early 60s. Soft-spoken, gentle eyes. The kind of woman who wore floral dresses and sensible shoes. She told people she'd moved to town after her husband passed away, that she needed a fresh start, a community to heal in. The church welcomed her with open arms. Within months, she was volunteering in the nursery, organizing the women's prayer group, baking for every church function. She had this way of knowing exactly what to say when someone was hurting. When Linda, one of the church members, lost her job, Margaret showed up at her door with groceries and a handwritten prayer. When Pastor Frank's teenage son was struggling with depression, Margaret somehow knew to check in on him. Even though the family had kept it private, people said she had a gift, a spiritual sensitivity. The pastor's wife, Carol, became especially close to her. They had coffee every Tuesday morning. Margaret would pray over Carol's concerns, offer wisdom, listen without judgment. Carol told friends that Margaret felt like the sister she never had. But there were moments, small moments, that should have raised questions. Like the time Margaret mentioned Linda's job interview before Linda had told anyone outside her immediate family. Or when she showed up at the Johnson family's house at 10 at night, saying she felt led to pray for them, even though they hadn't asked for prayer. Mrs. Johnson later admitted it made her uncomfortable, but she brushed it off as zealous faith. Then there were the children. Most kids loved Margaret, but a few seemed afraid of her. 7-year-old Emma refused to go to the nursery when Margaret was there. When her mother asked why, Emma said Margaret looked at her funny, like she was studying her. The family dog, usually friendly to everyone, would bark and growl whenever Margaret came near. But these were easy things to dismiss. Every church has its quirks, its misunderstandings. No one wanted to think badly of someone so devoted, so helpful, so present. And Margaret was always present. At every service, every event, every crisis. Looking back, people would realize she was too present, like she was watching, waiting. But for what? Margaret never talked about her past. When people asked where she lived before, she'd give vague answers. Down south, a small town, nothing special. She didn't have photos of her late husband, no children, no extended family. She said her phone had been stolen and she'd lost all her pictures. People accepted this because she seemed so genuine in her grief. What they didn't know was that Margaret wasn't her real name. What they didn't know was that she'd been asked to leave 2 other churches in 2 other states. What they didn't know was that in a storage unit across town, she kept a suitcase filled with items that would later make investigators' blood run cold. Items that suggested she'd been planning something from the very beginning. But in those 7 years, all the church saw was a faithful woman who never missed a program. A woman who seemed to love God and love people. A woman who, behind closed doors, was writing everything down in a diary that read less like a prayer journal and more like a surveillance log. 10:20, the incident, crime. It started small. Little things that were easy to explain away. In early 2023, the church lights began flickering during services. The sound system would cut out at random moments, always during prayer. The maintenance team checked everything, replaced batteries, rewired connections. Nothing helped. Then people started getting sick. Not seriously, but enough to notice. Stomach issues, migraines, exhaustion that lasted for days. At first, they blamed it on a virus going around, but it was always the same people, the ones Margaret prayed with most often. Carol, the pastor's wife, started having nightmares. Vivid, disturbing dreams where she'd wake up convinced someone was in her room. In some of the dreams, she said Margaret was standing at the foot of her bed, just watching. She told her husband, but he encouraged her to pray it away, convinced it was spiritual warfare, nothing more. Then, on a Wednesday night in March, something happened that couldn't be explained away. During a children's program, a 4-year-old boy named Caleb wandered away from the group. No one noticed for 20 minutes. When they finally realized he was missing, the entire church went into panic mode. They searched everywhere, called the police, checked the parking lot, the woods behind the church, the nearby homes. 4 hours later, Caleb was found a mile away, near the edge of the woods, sitting on the ground, completely calm. When his mother asked him where he'd been, he said a nice lady called him. He said she told him to follow her voice. When they asked him to describe the lady, he pointed across the room, at Margaret. Margaret denied it. She said she'd been in the sanctuary the whole time, that Caleb must have been confused, maybe dreamed it. Most people wanted to believe her, but some started to feel uneasy. Why would a child make that up? Why was he found in the direction of Margaret's house? The church became divided. Half defended Margaret, calling the accusations ridiculous. The other half quietly pulled their children away from her. Pastor Frank tried to keep the peace, but even he started noticing things. Margaret's prayers became longer, stranger. She'd use words he didn't recognize, phrases that didn't sound like any theology he knew. One Sunday, during communion, she whispered something under her breath that made the woman next to her freeze. When asked what Margaret had said, the woman couldn't repeat it. She just said it didn't sound like English. Then came the night that changed everything. The church was holding a special revival service in April. The building was packed. Worship was loud, emotional. Margaret was in her usual spot, 3rd row, eyes closed, hands raised. And then, without warning, the power went out. The entire building went dark. People screamed. Someone's child started crying. And in the darkness, a voice began speaking, low, rhythmic, unsettling. When someone finally got their phone flashlight on, they saw Margaret standing at the front, near the altar, her lips moving, her eyes wide open but unfocused, like she was in a trance. Pastor Frank ran to her, tried to snap her out of it. She didn't respond. 2 of the deacons had to physically restrain her because she started convulsing, her body jerking in ways that didn't look natural. Someone called an ambulance. Someone else called the police. And then, just as suddenly as it started, Margaret went completely still, her eyes focused. She looked around at the terrified faces surrounding her and smiled. Not a comforting smile, a knowing smile. She said, "I'm fine," and walked calmly toward the exit. No explanation, no apology, No fear. The congregation stood frozen, too shocked to stop her. Carol, the pastor's wife, was sobbing. The children who witnessed it would have nightmares for weeks. And Margaret? She got in her car and drove away. That was the last time anyone at the church saw her. When the police arrived, she was gone. Her house was empty. Her phone was disconnected. It was like she'd never existed. Except for one thing. A necklace she'd been wearing that night had fallen and broken during the incident. When someone picked it up, they noticed something inside the locket. A small piece of paper, folded tight. On it was a symbol no one recognized, and a list of names. All of them members of the church. All of them people Margaret had prayed with. And at the bottom of the list, one name circled in red. The name of Pastor Frank's unborn granddaughter. Number 20. Mid-video CTA. If you're still here, drop "I'm still watching" in the comments. Let's see how many are following this story. And tell me your state. I'm curious where you're watching from. 2035-0 Aftermath and investigation. The church didn't know what to do. Some wanted to move on, pretend it never happened. Others demanded answers. Pastor Frank held an emergency meeting the next night. The room was tense. People shouted over each other. Carol was too shaken to speak. Some members accused the pastor of enabling Margaret, of ignoring the warning signs. Others defended her, saying she'd been sick, that it was a medical episode, not something evil. But the children's parents weren't willing to let it go. Caleb's mother stood up and said, "My son was missing for 4 hours, and she was involved. I don't care what anyone says. That's not normal." The church split down the middle. Families who'd worshipped together for decades stopped speaking. The local news picked up the story. Reporters showed up asking questions. The headline read, "Church in Chaos After Unexplained Incident." The pastor received angry emails, some accusing him of protecting a dangerous person, others calling him a coward for not defending Margaret. He couldn't win. And through it all, Margaret was nowhere to be found. The police opened an investigation, but they didn't have much to go on. No crime had technically been committed. Margaret hadn't hurt anyone physically. The incident at the church was disturbing, sure, but not illegal. Still, the lead detective, a man named Officer Harris, had a gut feeling something was very wrong. He started digging into Margaret's background. What he found made his stomach turn. Margaret wasn't her real name. Her real name was Evelyn Marsh, and she had a history. In 2008, she'd been asked to leave a church in Tennessee after multiple families reported strange occurrences, sickness, nightmares, children claiming Evelyn watched them through windows at night. In 2013, the same pattern in a church in Kentucky. She'd integrate herself into the congregation, become trusted, and then things would start happening. People would get sick, relationships would fracture, and then she'd disappear before anyone could piece it together. Officer Harris brought this information to Pastor Frank. The pastor's face went pale. He said, "We welcomed her. We trusted her. Carol won't even sleep at night anymore." "How did we not see this?" Harris said. "Because she's good at what she does, and I don't think she's done." They decided to search the house Margaret had been renting. The landlord let them in. The place was almost empty. A few pieces of furniture. No personal items. But in the bedroom, under a loose floorboard, they found a box. Inside was a diary, leather-bound, filled with handwritten notes, page after page of observations, names, addresses, schedules, details about church members' lives, their kids, their health issues, their fears. It read like a surveillance report, and the most disturbing entries were about Carol and her daughter, Sarah, who was pregnant. Margaret had been tracking Sarah's pregnancy in detail, doctor's appointments, ultrasound dates, even the baby's expected due date. And on the last page, written in all capitals, "She will be the one." Officer Harris took the diary to a forensic psychologist. The psychologist read through it and said, "This person believes they're carrying out some kind of mission. They're not delusional in the clinical sense. They're organized, purposeful. This is someone who knows exactly what they're doing." The investigation expanded. Police contacted the other towns where Evelyn had lived. They found more complaints, more restraining orders, more families who said she'd inserted herself into their lives and wouldn't leave, but nothing that ever led to an arrest. She was always careful, always just under the legal line. A neighbor from the Tennessee church said, "She told me once that some people are chosen and some are vessels." I didn't know what she meant at the time. Now I think I do. Back in the Midwest town, the church tried to return to normal, but the damage was done. Attendance dropped. Families left for other churches. Carol stopped coming altogether. She couldn't walk into the building without having a panic attack. And then, 6 weeks after Margaret disappeared, something happened that made everyone realize the nightmare wasn't over. Security footage from the church, footage that had been reviewed multiple times, was looked at again by a tech-savvy church member. He slowed it down, frame by frame, and there, in weeks of overnight recordings, was Margaret entering the church after midnight, alone, walking through the aisles, standing at the altar, kneeling in the nursery. She'd been coming back for months. While everyone thought she was just a faithful member, she'd been entering the building in the dead of night. How she got in, no one knew. The doors were always locked. But there she was, week after week, watching, waiting, preparing. 35-0, 45-0. The twist. Revelation. Officer Harris pulled surveillance from nearby businesses and homes. He pieced together a timeline. Evelyn Marsh, also known as Margaret, had been in town for 8 years, not 7. She'd been watching the church for a full year before ever walking through the doors. She'd attended services at other churches first, quietly observing, blending in. She'd specifically chosen Pastor Frank's church. But why? The answer came from an old social media post. 3 years before Evelyn arrived, Pastor Frank's daughter, Sarah, had posted about a mission trip, about feeling called to ministry, about hoping to one day raise children in the faith. Evelyn had commented on the post under a fake account. The comment said, "What a beautiful calling. Your children will be blessed." Sarah never responded, probably didn't even notice. But Evelyn had. She'd been tracking Sarah ever since. The psychologist believed Evelyn saw Sarah's future children as spiritually significant, perhaps believing she could influence or claim them in some way. The diary confirmed it. Entries about Sarah's engagement, her wedding, her pregnancy, and repeated references to the unborn baby being special, powerful, chosen. Officer Harris contacted churches in 4 other states. The pattern was the same. Evelyn targeted congregations with young families, specifically families with pregnant women or newborns. She'd integrate herself, gain trust, and then focus her attention on one specific child. In 2 cases, families reported that after Evelyn left, their children developed unexplained phobias, night terrors, and behavioral issues that required therapy. In Kentucky, a mother said her daughter, who'd been healthy, started refusing to eat after Evelyn prayed over her. The child said Evelyn told her she didn't need food, that she could live on faith. The girl had to be hospitalized. When confronted, Evelyn claimed she was misunderstood, that she was only trying to teach spiritual discipline. No charges were filed. She moved on. The police in the Midwest town finally had enough to bring her in for questioning. But there was one problem. They couldn't find her. She'd vanished completely. No credit card activity, no phone records, no sightings. It was like she'd become a ghost. Then, 3 months after the incident, a tip came in. A woman matching Evelyn's description had been spotted at a church in Ohio. Officer Harris contacted local authorities. They found her attending a Sunday service, sitting quietly in the back row, smiling at the families around her. She was arrested outside the church. No resistance, no panic. She just smiled and said, "I was wondering when you'd find me." In the interrogation room, Evelyn was calm, too calm. Officer Harris asked her why. Why the churches? Why the families? Why the children? Evelyn looked at him like he was missing something obvious. She said, "Because they need me. They're surrounded by people who don't see. I see. I've always seen." When asked about the diary, about the surveillance, about entering the church at night, she didn't deny any of it. She said, "I was never hiding. They just weren't ready to see." Her lawyer argued she'd committed no crime. Trespassing? Maybe. But the church couldn't prove forced entry. The strange behavior? Unsettling, but not illegal. The diary? Creepy, but not evidence of intent to harm. And technically, she was right. There was no physical evidence of a crime. No assault, no theft, no direct threat. Just a long, disturbing pattern of psychological manipulation that fell through every legal crack. The prosecutor tried to build a case around stalking and harassment, but without victims willing to testify in multiple states, and without concrete proof of harm, the case fell apart. Evelyn Marsh was released. The church was horrified. Carol had a breakdown. Pastor Frank considered resigning. The town erupted in protest. How could she just walk free? But the justice system had no answer. Evelyn left the courthouse, got into a car driven by someone no one recognized, and disappeared again. This time, Officer Harris feared for good. But he made a promise to himself and to the families. If she surfaced again, he'd be ready. He started a database, a network of churches across the country, a warning system, because he knew deep down that Evelyn Marsh wasn't done. People like her never are. 45-0, 55-0. The final twist. Resolution. 3 months passed. The church slowly began to heal. Carol started attending again, though she sat in a different section, far from the third row. Families trickled back. Pastor Frank preached about forgiveness, about spiritual warfare, about trusting God even when things don't make sense. And then, on a Sunday in late September, Sarah gave birth, a healthy baby girl. They named her Grace. The church celebrated. It felt like a new beginning, like maybe they could finally move past the nightmare. Carol held her granddaughter and cried. She said, "We made it. We're safe now." But the next morning, something arrived at the church. A letter, no return address, postmarked from 2 states away. Inside was a single handwritten note. It read, "Congratulations on the birth of Grace Elizabeth. She's beautiful. Tell Carol I'm so happy for her." The note was unsigned, but everyone knew who it was from. How did she know the baby's name? They hadn't announced it publicly yet. Only immediate family knew the middle name. Carol's hands shook as she read it. Pastor Frank called Officer Harris immediately. Harris said, "She's watching. I don't know how, but she's still watching." They checked Sarah's social media. Nothing. No posts. No updates. They checked Carol's. Same thing. The family had been careful. So how? A week later, Sarah noticed something odd. A friend request on an old Facebook account she hadn't used in years. The profile picture was a flower. No name, just a generic account. She declined it. But then she realized the account had been created the day after Grace was born, and it had tried to follow her, her mother, and 3 other church members. All denied. But the attempts kept coming. Different accounts, different names, all flowers, all created within days of each other. Officer Harris traced the accounts. They led nowhere. Burner emails, VPN masking. Whoever was behind them knew how to stay hidden. But the message was clear. Evelyn was still out there, still watching, and still fixated on Grace. The church hired security. Families installed cameras. Sarah and her husband considered moving. But how do you run from someone who's already proven they can find you? Then, 2 months later, the final, most chilling moment. A family who lived 3 blocks from the church reviewed their doorbell camera footage after noticing someone had been on their porch at night. They scrolled back through days of recordings. And there, on multiple nights, was a figure walking slowly past their house, pausing, looking toward the windows. The footage was grainy, but the build, the walk, the posture, it matched. It was her. She'd been in town, walking the streets at night. And based on the direction she was walking, she'd been heading toward Sarah's house. Officer Harris escalated the case. A restraining order was filed. A warrant was issued. But once again, Evelyn Marsh vanished before they could serve it. Some believe she's still out there, moving from town to town, finding new churches, new families. Others think she's watching from a distance, waiting. Waiting for what? No one knows. Grace is 2 years old now, healthy, happy. Sarah doesn't take her to church anymore. She homeschools. Limit social media. Keeps the curtains closed. Because once you've been watched by someone like Evelyn Marsh, you never really feel safe again. Officer Harris still gets reports, sightings, suspicious individuals at churches in neighboring states. None confirmed, but the pattern is there. And every time, he wonders, is it her? And if it is, who's next? The truth is, Evelyn Marsh was never charged with a serious crime. She's out there, legally free, attending churches, blending in, smiling at families who have no idea who she really is. Maybe she's in your town. Maybe she's sitting in your church right now. Third row, never late, never absent, always watching. 55 to 060 to 0 engagement, CTA, strong close. So, what do you think happened that night in the church? Was Evelyn Marsh a manipulative predator who knew exactly what she was doing? Or was there something darker at work? Something no one wants to say out loud? Do you think justice was served? Or did she slip through the cracks of a system that wasn't built to handle someone like her? And here's the real question. What would you do if you found out someone in your church, someone you trusted, had been watching your family for years? How would you feel if it was your child she'd been writing about in that diary? Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know what you think really happened. Was it mental illness, obsession, or something we don't have a name for? And if you're wondering whether this could happen in your community, the answer is, it already has. Stories like this happen more than you think. They just don't always make the news. If you want another real story, with twists just like this, wait until you see the next video. It's even more shocking. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because the truth is, the most terrifying stories aren't the ones we make up. They're the ones that really happened, and they're closer than you think.